By the 500s, the whole southern half of Japan, in other words, the Yamato-dominated part of Japan. Remember, the whole northern half at this point is Ainu-controlled still, but the whole southern half is in full-blown borrow from China mode. And one of the things they're going to borrow from China, to a large degree, is Buddhism, Chinese-style Buddhism. It's going to come through Korea and through China. Now, the tradition is that in the mid-500s, 552, a Korean monk visited Japan and introduced Buddhism, after which it spread. Monasteries were built, temples were built, students, scholars, converts went to Korea, went to China in particular to study, to memorize. They were there for a year, 10 years, 20 years, and they'd bring back not just Buddhism, but Chinese culture, Chinese philosophy, Chinese ideas about politics. This really was a watershed time for Japan in terms of politics. If you think about what Japan looks like, Japan's geography, Japan is not a country that is very amenable to a highly centralized imperial system like China. Japan is an island group, and that alone would impede, communication and transportation and other things in a pre-industrial time. But Japan is also covered in thick forests. Japan is covered, most importantly, in high, rugged mountains, lots of them. Japan is more amenable to a system that is, clan-based, based in this valley or this set of valleys, one in which the clans act autonomously. It would be very hard to exert centralized control in a place like Japan. And indeed, that was the sort of system that existed in Japan before this time, and honestly speaking, during and after this time as well. But it's during this time that the Chinese idea of a centralized imperial system, one centralized state, comes to Japan, and even though it's imperfectly applied, and even though the traditional clan system will continue to put pressure on, and sometimes very successfully put pressure on those who want to implement this system, the fact is, after this period, this system is here to stay in one form or another. It's not going away, and things will never be the same. So if you're the imperial family, or you're one of the great families around the imperial family, the Chinese model is very attractive. Obviously, were the Chinese model to be implemented, your power would be magnified. Okay, so this is a very attractive proposition, and surprise, surprise, it's the imperial family and the great families around the imperial family, in particular the Fujiwaras, who are the real power behind the throne for like 400 years, including during the Nara period here. They are very pro-China, pro all things China, and in particular, the Chinese imperial system. It's during this time that the head of the Shinto faith system becomes the emperor and the head of the Shinto faith system. Tenno, the emperor, the supreme political authority, not just religious authority, but political authority in the land. That's a Chinese idea that's imported to Japan, and it's here to stay after this period. If your goal is to transplant the Chinese imperial system here to Japan, well, you need an imperial capital, one that's modeled after the great and glorious Tang capital there in China, Chang'an. And that is exactly what those in power seek to do here in Nara. Nara is Japan's first attempt at an imperial capital, a permanent fixed capital. Before this, the capital would move upon the death of the emperor. After this, the idea of a fixed capital sticks. And Nara is, not coincidentally, laid out almost exactly like Chang'an, a little smaller. There's no great city wall. There are a few other small differences, but for the most part, it's remarkably similar to Chang'an. In fact, that building behind me, this is the site of the original palace. This whole area here, it hasn't been developed. It's remained rural. It was abandoned when Nara was abandoned as political capital, but this is it. This is the actual site of that first attempt at a Chinese imperial capital. Now, eventually, Nara would be abandoned as political capital. Why would that be? Nara was supposed to be the great imperial capital modeled after Chang'an to last forever. So why would it be abandoned after, 70 years or so? We don't quite know. The guess is that it was the fault of the Buddhist establishment, so another import from China, that Buddhism had grown so strong and had built up so much political power. I mean, its temples, its monasteries. I mean, this is what's left today. If you come to Nara today, you can see the remains of the palace, but the coolest things to see in Nara today are the Buddhist temples. And we're talking, you know, biggest wooden structure in the world, huge statues. I mean, this is what's left, not the royal residences or really the palaces. This was a powerful institution, the Buddhist institution. And, you know, their temples and structures were built right around, we assume, the very royal residences. So these guys wielded immense power. And the assumption is that the emperors at some point said, you know, we need a priest-free city. And so Nara was abandoned as political capital. Another capital was tried, and then eventually Kyoto. And in Kyoto, very strict rules will be put in place as to where, you know, Buddhist structures can and cannot be built. How far away from, for example, the royal palace they must be. All based, we assume, on the Nara experience. So, but this is it. This is the site of the first imperial capital in Japanese history, an attempt to imitate the great empire across the sea.